This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Digital Law Podcast, brought to you by Digital Law and produced by Anson Evaluate. As a bit of background, we're a law firm that works solely on technology, cybersecurity, and legal issues. In each episode, we look at stories in the law related to digital technology from around the world with an emphasis on data protection and cybersecurity. I'm Amelia Davies, an apprentice solicitor at Digital Law UK, and I'm joined by my colleague Peter Wright. And we're just going to run through some stories that have been coming up this week. So I will pass over to Peter to introduce himself, and then we will get started.
My name's Peter. I'm a solicitor and the managing director at Digital Law, and looking forward to running through a few interesting stories this week, a few of which are sort of partially related to the same thing, and a few interesting breaches, as always. So I'll pass back to Amelia to kick us off.
Thanks, Peter. So this first story actually really hooked me in because, if you are a keen listener to the podcast, you'll hear that we do talk about, your bog standard cyber attack. And I say bog standard, I mean, they all have their own nuances, but all in all, it's like data stolen, big deal. But here we are looking at a hack that released genetic profiles stolen from DNA testing firm 23andMe. And this was also far greater than first thought and affected around 6.9 million people. So as a bit of background here, 23andMe are the home testing service, and they said almost half its customer base of 14 million people had information stolen during a major hacking attack in October, far exceeding the 14,000 people they previously said had been affected. And so why is this interesting, you might ask? Well, we're looking at DNA data. I mean, so the very makeup of your being. This hacker who went by the name of Gollum has published this genetic profile on breach forums. So a cybercrime marketplace claimed that the profiles include wealthy families serving Zionism and the wealthiest people living in the US and Western Europe. So there's a fair amount to unpack here.
Yes, and indeed, I think the conclusions that you can draw from it can be quite broad. But I think specifically, first of all, it's worth thinking about. This is one of an increasing number of companies that are out there that offer to process potentially large volumes of very sensitive data about their users. So in this instance, it's DNA testing. There are other DNA testing companies out there where you can find out your heritage, which is always quite an interesting thing to do. Finding out you're part Viking or part French or whatever can be absolutely fascinating. But of course, to get there, it means that they've actually got to process your DNA, which is, of course, unique to each of us, which means you can be identified from your DNA. And in this instance, we're talking about, it's not just your contact info, it's actually the information that the hackers have got hold of includes the percentage of DNA that you share with other relatives, as well as reports on your ancestry and your location, as well as your date of birth. So we're talking a lot of information here, more than you'd get in your average sort of, we've lost a load of emails, data protection breach.
Yeah.
And it's the sheer volume at 14,000. The hacker is claiming, oh yes, this is very wealthy people in the US and Western Europe.
Not 14,000, is it? It's 6.9 million.
Sorry, 6.9 million.
They thought it was 14,000.
Yes.
We're talking about millions of people.
Yeah. And it actually just shows as well how popular these platforms are. Yet, as is often the case, no system is entirely invulnerable, and this one's been compromised. It makes you realize that there's lots of different apps out there, everything from the ones that sort of track you and see what your blood glucose and blood sugar level is in terms of whether you might be on the way towards being diabetic, to all the different apps that look at your GPS location data and work out how quick the run was that you've just gone on, or how many steps you've walked today, or what your resting heart rate is, or how you slept last night. You get the idea. It's big business now to sort of monetize and find ways of tracking data that you knew could even want or need to track in the first place. But people now get addicted to do it. But the companies that do this...
For YouTube viewers, you can see I've got my Apple Watch on, which does exactly what you just said.
Exactly. It does all of these things, and then there are separate smart watches and products you can get that do this sort of stuff too. But they're all collecting vast amounts of what you might think, well, who else is going to be interested in, what my heart rate was at 2:00 in the afternoon on a Friday? Well, it's just the fact that then you add in things like that GPS data and add in others, and it just means that this is certainly special category data, so it should be looked after to a high standard. Yet even with, in theory, those sorts of protections in place, this company has found itself to have been hacked, and it's the sheer volume as well as the sensitivity of data that I think we need to take account of.
Thanks, Peter. So that kind of sums up our first story. So moving away from the world of hacks now to the ever-changing world of crypto. And I mean, if you are a regular listener, you'd have heard our skepticism over the last couple of years in terms of the crypto. And today is no different. So we've got here two very much interconnecting stories. Firstly, we're looking at Mercedes Formula One team and they're being sued by users of FTX, a crypto exchange based in the Bahamas. And so according to them, the team and the US Baseball League MLB helped FTX commit fraud through promotional deals with the exchange. And if you have been following the news, you will have seen that FTX founder, Sam, I can't remember his name.
Sam Bankman-Fried.
Thank you. Sam Bankman-Fried has actually been sentenced and charged with fraud on multiple occasions. So this is not so much of a surprise.
Yes, well, funny enough, I don't think he's been sentenced yet. I know he was found guilty. I think we're still waiting to see in the wonderful tradition of US sentencing how many millennia he's going to be imprisoned for. But certainly this is now a piece of litigation that has followed on the back of that conviction. Because that conviction showed that whereas I think everyone was waiting to see if there was going to be a sort of a rabbit pulled out of a hat, whereby Bankman-Fried was going to show, oh, no, it wasn't fraud, it was perfectly legitimate, and I'm this wonderful, very clever entrepreneur, and it was all entirely legitimate, and you people just don't understand. And I think everyone was waiting for that, and it got to the defence, and his defence was, well, I didn't know, and I thought it was perfectly legal. And everyone went, oh, well, that's not enough. Sorry, mate, you're guilty. And now we're therefore getting litigation that's following. Now, whether a class action like this can succeed or not is going to be a very interesting matter, because arguably, you have more of a history of class actions in the US than you do certainly in the UK. And in this instance, we're talking about, and Mercedes isn't alone here, being an organization that had a relationship with FTX. I mean, FTX, during its brief life, was worth billions of dollars. They did everything from donating to the Democratic National Committee. They sponsored, they donated to both presidential campaigns as well as to Democrats standing for election in different states at sort of at states level. And they also then had relationships here with the baseball team, with Mercedes, with other sports teams. You only have to take a look at Bankman-Fried's Instagram to see, each weekend where would he be in terms of suddenly being photographed with very popular individuals as they tried to build FTX as a brand. And in this instance, certainly when this happened, I know that the Mercedes Formula One team were quite shocked to find that FTX was not the legitimate cryptocurrency exchange that they had been led to believe. And Mercedes are actually quite funny in terms of who they will work with and sponsor. So it's all very much sort of blue chip companies, AMG, Mercedes, Petronas, so it's Petronas Malaysian Oil as well. And they'll always be, I say, quite careful in who they choose to partner and associate with. So I think they were quite shocked to find that FTX wasn't what they thought it was. Then it will come down to the approach here in terms of group actions and litigation, presumably looking at probably initially trying this in the US. Whether they will succeed there from a jurisdictional perspective remains to be seen. The problem they will potentially have is that the Mercedes Formula One team is based in the UK. Mercedes, and it'll be a matter of actually them working out who they're actually going to sue for that matter, because the Formula One team in the UK is one entity. You've got Mercedes, the car manufacturer in Germany. There are various corporate entities. It will be a matter of working out which one is appropriate in terms of which one signed the deal with FTX that you then say is therefore liable under this. And is that potentially in the UK? Is it Germany? Is it somewhere else? Is it in the US? It quite conceivably could be. But it would be a matter of, I think, before they sort of rush off to court, and it's saying that 2 lawsuits have been filed in Florida, then it's going to be a matter of, can the court in Florida be the appropriate place to decide on this issue? And that could be where this then gets enmeshed and could get quite bogged down. It could also get quite expensive before it gets anywhere.
And that very nicely leads us on to the second part of this story. So we are next looking at footballer Cristiano Ronaldo, and he is facing a class action lawsuit in the US again over his promotion of Binance, so slightly different cryptocurrency we're looking at here. And this is the largest cryptocurrency exchange in the world. So the plaintiffs claim his endorsement led them to making loss-making investments. And they're seeking damages of a sum exceeding $1 billion. So that's around 790 million pounds sterling. And so this is specifically in relation to the collection that Binance announced called CR7, which is a collection of non-fungible tokens, NFTs, in partnership with Ronaldo, which the footballer said would reward fans for all their years of support. And when considering the starting price on these, I think the starting price was around $77, which are now at this stage worth about $1 singular.
Yeah. And so the interesting thing here is we aren't looking at a corporate failure like we are with FTX. Binance, at time of recording, is still trading. That's all we'll say on that. That's a rabbit hole to go down another day. But at the same time that cryptocurrency was at the height of its boom in 2022, we also had NFTs, non-fungible tokens, being popular. Certainly in sort of, particularly during the pandemic when none of us had an awful lot else to do, there were stories of some NFTs being traded for frankly incredible sums and massive returns, being popular to a few lucky individuals who traded certain things, made a huge sum, and then got out at the right time. On the back of that, we then had everyone here from Cristiano Ronaldo endorsing an NFT through to, I think Donald Trump actually, as part of his general commercial activities, launched a set of Donald Trump NFTs. So you almost get to the point where, at the point where Trump is getting on the bandwagon, you think, well, clearly everyone's is now doing this. But of course, yes, some of these things would start off, let's say, $70 odd. You think, oh, well, this will obviously accrue in value. Cristiano Ronaldo, the world's probably best recognised footballer, certainly probably the wealthiest footballer. So therefore, by associating with him, you think, oh, this must be fantastic. It will surely accrue in value. This can't possibly be a bad bet. And then you suddenly find out that the thing is now worth a few cents rather than dollars. And obviously, you've lost a huge sum. So in this instance, it's just saying, look, you endorsed a incredibly bad investment. We used to hear of a bad investment. You used to hear of people, they lost everything because they invested on the wrong property deal or something. But now you can lose everything just by putting it into the wrong assets online, and suddenly it doesn't just collapse. It collapses so infinitesimally that you're simply left with absolutely nothing, not half of what you put in, but the 70th of what you put in. So you can understand why they're quite upset. And ordinarily, of course, whenever you see traditional investment opportunities advertised, it always says, your investment value may go up as well as down, or may go down as well as up.
Said as quickly as humanly possible, in the smallest possible print.
They always fast forward it at the end, but it's still there.
Yeah.
And it is in the small print. But because of the hype around cryptocurrency and NFTs, perhaps people were engaging and not thinking, oh, this is literally like putting all my money onto a roulette wheel and who knows what will happen. And they always say with these sort of investments, can you afford not to see that money again is the point. And in this instance, it's still gone. So, can you necessarily make someone whole after a investment that clearly was more of a sort of casino style investment than a more traditional securities and equities investment or stocks investment is one thing. But in this instance, it will be interesting to see, can you therefore potentially sue someone just because they endorsed what became a massive loss-making investment? But this also then draws to question the fact that in the US, they're of the view that all of everything from an NFT to indeed cryptocurrency itself is indeed the trading of a security. And if it's a security, it shouldn't be traded in that manner anyway. So that's the reason why the US Securities and Exchange Commission is clamping down in a big way on crypto assets as a whole. So that's it's the reason why FTX itself was domiciled out in the Bahamas rather than the US. So it gives you an idea of why so many of these things are being domiciled offshore in the first place, because they don't particularly want the prying eyes of major regulators to get involved.
Well, that's a great way to end that story. And I'm sure we will hear more about this as FTX and other cryptocurrencies continue to. Have you got something to add there?
No, I was just going to add to that as well, that I know that we started off saying, over the last few years, we were a bit, not necessarily things we've said about crypto. I still think that the underlying technology could be the future in terms of digital finance and trading. But it's a bit like with the dot-com boom of the early 2000s, where there was a massive inflation and speculation that proved to be unfounded. And we've got a similar thing now. So the underlying technology could well be the long-term future basis for the global financial system. But it ain't going to come riding to the rescue perhaps as quickly as people wanted and hoped it was going to happen.
Thanks, Peter. So moving on to our next story here, we are sticking with the Americas. So Okta said on Tuesday that hackers stole information on all users of its customer support system in a network breach 2 months ago. So the San Francisco-based company notified customers that it had determined hackers downloaded a report containing data including names and email addresses of all clients that used its computer support system, the company said in an email statement to Reuters. So this is another quite interesting one in the fact that this is based in the US. And I think the importance here is the fact that US data protection law is very different, and this is looked at on a state-by-state level, and therefore there isn't the same overarching legislation or even enforcement because of the state-by-state take.
Exactly. You don't get your large-scale regulators doing massive regulation and enforcement like you get with GDPR in Europe. So, for example, the Irish Data Protection Commission being dragged kicking and screaming by the European Data Protection Board to issue fines against WhatsApp and Meta and other big tech firms. In this instance, you instead get the main regulation you get following sort of big data breaches in the US is where you then get class actions. In this instance, you very often therefore find that companies don't have the reporting obligations that companies have in Europe. You don't have to notify the regulator, you don't have to notify affected data subjects. But if you're a publicly traded company, you do have to then go public, because of course the fact that you've been hacked could affect the price at which your shares are publicly traded. Therefore, you do have to be public if you have to be public about the fact you've been hacked if you are a publicly traded company in the States. So in this instance, Okta have had to disclose this information. Funnily enough, their shares collapsed as a result. With this instance, it's kind of worrying that they're engaged in sort of the it's not just sort of personal data about individuals. It's actually the fact that the hackers have been able to view some of the individual files uploaded by Okta's own clients, which is concerning. Okta provides identity security services such as a single sign-on and multi-factor authentication.
Is that irony, I hear? Just slightly?
Yeah, just a little bit. So the idea of come to us for your secure logins on your applications. And this is trusted. So Microsoft use this. Well, Microsoft backed OpenAI. OpenAI, of course, associated with ChatGPT and Sam Altman and all of the things that are happening with regards to some quite exciting AI, innovative AI research in the States is being taking place through OpenAI. And then when you find that Okta provides their identity services, that gives you a slight cause for concern. And we've also then got here the fact that, it's information about users of systems. So how would you log on? It could be single sign-on. That might be biometric. This press release doesn't say, but increasingly we end up doing, scanning your face or fingerprint scans to be able to get on to some apps. So, we're talking about that element of multi-factor authentication in any event, so emails, passwords, etc., and indeed then potentially, I'll say, individual files uploaded by certain clients. So a cause for concern. The other thing to bear in mind is that, as I say, we don't hear about all the hacks that happen in America for this very reason. So this one, they've had to disclose and tell us about how many tech firms based in California suffer serious cyber incidents like this, but they aren't publicly traded, and therefore we never find out about it.
That is something to be seen. I don't
There's
think we'll
something
ever.
to think about.
I don't think we'll ever understand quite how much goes on behind closed doors, as it would seem.
Indeed.
Moving on to our next hack. It's a week of hacks, I think. So we are moving to Magic Circle firm Allen and Overy, and they have refused to comment on whether it paid a ransom to cyber criminals to have it removed from a hacker's site. So the firm systems were compromised earlier this month, and a ransomware group, Lockbit, claimed responsibility, posting it would publish stolen data on the 29th of November. However, the A&O listing was removed ahead of that deadline, prompting questions about whether the firm had paid money to ensure the data was not released. And why this is interesting is because Allen and Overy are a law firm. And again, if you're a regular listener to our podcast, you'll understand that law firms have very specific responsibilities and obligations, particularly in terms of when you have a cyber attack or a hack. And we are held to a very high standard. Therefore, the fact that they have refused to comment on whether they paid a ransom for the data is interesting, because our regulator, the Solicitor Regulator Authority, they pretty much say do not do it, isn't it?
Yes,
But that is the big but.
Traditional legal response. Yes, but so the interesting thing here is that classically it's always the case that you think, don't feed the trolls, don't pay the ransomware ransom. Interestingly, the UK Information Commissioner's Office and the UK National Cybersecurity Centre both jointly wrote to bodies in the legal profession, SRA, Law Society, Bar Council, and they sent a joint letter basically saying, would you please stop your law firms from advising their clients to pay ransomware fines, because it really isn't helpful and is encouraging the proliferation of ransomware attacks that the UK economy sustains every year. Would you stop doing that, please?
I mean, this is also the fact that, you pay this great big sum of money. Is there a guarantee you get your data back? No. Is there a guarantee you won't have to pay more in the future? No.
Yeah, this is just it, because you're paying the money to criminals. I think that's the thing you have to really bear in mind here. This isn't a concierge at a hotel who will then go and politely do what you ask them to do. And that's the real thing here. So in this instance, I mean, this article in the Law Society Gazette refers to A&O having negotiations with the potential negotiations with the ransomware hackers. And I think the point we have to make here is we don't know if A&O have paid or not. We don't know if they have any intention of paying. We are engaged in the wonderful world of rabid speculation, which we are doing. But the point is that it was expected they would publish the data on the 29th of November, and they haven't. What has happened to make them not do that? And what inferences can we make from that? And there's also the fact that with large-scale corporates suffering ransomware attacks like this now, sometimes it isn't necessarily a decision down to them. So Allen Overy might be thinking, well, if we do, we'll have to make a claim under potentially our cyber liability insurance or our professional indemnity insurance. Have they notified those insurers? And those insurers have then said, in order to minimize our liability, we would like you to pay the ransom. Otherwise, we will pull your cover, or we will not pay as much as we might otherwise pay. Is that one of the things to, again, wild speculation here. But these are some of the things that increasingly organizations have to bear in mind, that insurers will have their own agenda and may take their own advice and have their own point in terms of what the insured, in this case someone like Alden Overy, should do when facing the ransomware attack. So it's not necessarily as straightforward as the ICO and the NCSC would have you believe, but there is still the element of, if these hackers have been successful with this attack on A&O and they have paid a ransom, what do you think they're going to do next? Well, they'll turn around and hack A&O again because they've done it once and they found it ridiculously straightforward and profitable. But then they'll think, oh, which other big law firms can we target for a big payday? Take a wild guess. So this is the danger of encouraging them, unfortunately. So while it may be expedient to initially pay the ransom, what will the longer term consequences of that be for A&O and the legal profession more generally? So really the point here is this ongoing sort of balancing act between what the ICO and the NCSC say and then some of the commercial imperatives that larger, bigger corporates face when being on the receiving end of a cyber intrusion like this. I suppose the best thing to do would be to turn around and try and make sure that you minimize your risk of a cyber attack where possible. Might be one thing you might do.
Just maybe.
Yeah.
So moving on to our next news story here. So this is an interesting one, and it's one we certainly beat the drum about. Don't use Google Drive. And here we are. Google Drive misplaces months' worth of customer files. There is little information regarding what happened. Some users reported that synchronization had simply stopped working, so the cloud storage was out of date. Others could get some of their information back by fiddling with cache files, although the limited advice on the offer for the affected was to leave things well alone until engineers come up with a solution. So all in all, really great recommendation there for using Google Drive.
Yeah, so the point here is don't use Google Drive for your business. Even if you're paying, the premium for, the premium Google Drive rather than the freebie personal version. I mean, you certainly shouldn't be running your business or your startup from the personal Google Docs that you get from, your Gmail account or using a Gmail account.
And when we say personal, we mean the free version.
Yes. But even then, in this instance here, we're talking about businesses using the business version, and they still found that their Google Drive files had disappeared. So it's not, these platforms are not necessarily the sort of bulletproof, all singing, all dancing, available 24/7 platforms that you might think. And there's various reasons why. I mean, it might be straightforward to use, and you can use their collaboration tools, and it's easy to access, and blah, blah, blah. Guess what? If it's easy to access, it's easy for hackers to access as well. So this kind of reinforces, and the minute we found out about this story, we sent this to several of our clients that we know are using Google Documents for their everyday business operations to say, just for the avoidance of doubt, we keep telling you not to use it, and this is the reason why. So it's just a matter of sort of, nail this story to the wall as an example of why you need to invest in more reliable, secure means of working collaboratively and sharing content and documents to then prevent the previous story from happening to you, where you end up being hacked or in this instance, losing valuable files.
Thanks, Peter. So our next story here is we are moving to Jersey. So a charity set up to protect Jersey's culture has written to its members to warn of a data privacy incident. So Jersey Heritage said it had been alerted to a breach by the company that handles its membership direct debits. It was told an unauthorized third party may have accessed customers' names, sort codes, and bank account numbers. However, Chief Executive John Carter said the charity took incidents like this very seriously, and at this early stage, we do not know whether any member's data has been compromised, simply that the financial institution which processes this data is aware of the potential incident. So, fairly broad outlook on this. However, the approach is still the same. We have seen in the more recent years charities being targeted by hackers because they do not have the level of security or training to understand what you need to do in terms of protecting people's data. And also, I'm not sure I was going with that one.
No, okay. So we've got the fact that, yes, very often they don't have the resources that larger organizations do. But as we've already seen in today's discussion, big organisations with, in theory, lots of security get hacked as well. But in this instance, it's a smaller charity, and unfortunately, it's found that it's been vulnerable to being exploited. But also, I think the other thing to bear in mind here is always remember with the Crown dependencies, such as Jersey, Guernsey, the Isle of Man, Isles of Scilly, etc. These are countries that are not actually part of the United Kingdom. So we aren't talking here about the UK Information Commissioner. We're talking about the Jersey office of the Information Commissioner. This is Jersey's own regulator, which doesn't necessarily have much resources itself, which will investigate and do something about this. But the reason we flag this up is that a lot of these places, Jersey, Isle of Man, are tax havens, and therefore lots of organisations domicile their offices there so that they can do a lot of their sort of trading in offshore wealth and commodities in that tax-free environment. Bear in mind, if you are using organisations domiciled in the Crown dependencies, Jersey, Isle of Man, that they have slightly different laws, a slightly different version of GDPR, a slightly different regulator, and it all works slightly differently. So bear in mind if you're using that to have details of your estate, your assets funneled through organisations there, that the laws governing all of that very rich personal data are not the same as they are on the mainland.
Thanks, Peter. So that brings us to our final story of today. And we are looking at porn users. And they could have their faces scanned to prove their age with extra checks for young-looking adults following draft guidance from Ofcom. So Ofcom have outlined how it expects firms to comply with the new registrations when it comes into force sometime in 2025, saying age checks must be highly effective at correctly determining whether or not a particular user is a child. So kind of stepping away from the issue of porn usage in itself, it's that we are actually going to be looking at the specific checks that they're going to be asking for. So these age checks will have to go well beyond simply clicking a button to self-declare that you're an adult. They will be looking at acceptable methods, including requiring government photographic ID, such as a passport, checking if the user has previously had age restrictions removed from a mobile phone, credit card checks, digital ID wallets that store a user's proof of age, which can be shared with the site, and facial age estimation tech, which will scan users' faces and use software to infer if they are adults, is also an option. So we're talking about a great deal of data and almost biometric data in some cases here. And, you know, if we are referring back to specific porn users, these sites are not exactly that reputable in the first place. So if they are collecting this wide and very special category data, it's not looking good here.
Yeah. Where to begin? So this is another manifestation of the gift that keeps on giving, the online safety bill. That's where this has come from. These are measures embedded within that legislation that will become law next year. And it's now the Online Safety Act. And it will mean that potentially those who, the point being here, we don't want children viewing pornography, children becoming sexualized and
or adult related content. Not just the porn industry, we're talking about all adult related content.
Yes. And therefore they're saying that you'd have to have identity blockers on there to therefore show that you are an adult. And one of the ways that this is seen is because technically children aren't supposed to have accounts on things like Facebook. They do, they just fake the date of birth. And I think to get around that, that's why they're now talking about saying, well, shall we do the scanning of a face? And therefore, if we scan your face and we can tell that you are therefore not a child, you can then continue to use the service. But of course, to do that requires the collection and storage of biometric data. It could be worse than that. Are we going to then have scanning of your driving license or passport to prove that you are an adult? Are we going to have credit checks? Is it going to be other forms of digital ID? Whatever it is, this means that sites at the moment people are just going to and then viewing. In order to do that, it will be more of a transactional relationship in that the user, even if they are not having to pay for any content, in effect, you will be paying for it because you'll be providing very sensitive ID. And then we've already talked about a couple of big data breaches. in today's episode. So we can imagine that if you're running your porn site, you're really going to put huge amounts of resources into making sure that the personal data on there is encrypted and stored in secure, legitimate means. Probably not.
No.
So the idea of you may as well just upload your information to these sites and then just sellotape a copy of it to your front window because everyone else will be able to see it. And obviously then you're talking about things like, photographic ID, which is sensitive. So you don't particularly want that stuff shared far and wide, but that would be the effect of these checks. So therefore, there'll be, and this is where this potentially goes. So, okay, the very worthwhile thing, we don't want children to watch pornography, but the end outcome would be is that probably people are not going to end up accessing this sort of content in the numbers that they are at the moment where these checks are not required. And you can't help but think there is something a little bit puritanical at play here about, we don't want people looking at this sort of content, or we don't want that, do we? And it's like, if we get that, well, what will be the next thing that ends up being, we don't want children watching that, so therefore we'll have to stop it for everyone.
Yeah.
What's going to be next? Is it going to be slasher horror films?
It does make you think of...
That is at the back of my mind. While I'm not for a minute condoning the fact that this sort of content, you don't want children watching that adult content anyway, is this necessarily the best way to go about it?
And I think that remains to be seen, because I'm sure obviously we have made our opinion fairly clear on this. The fact that this collecting the sheer amount of data in that way does not seem like a great way to actually make sure that we are following the principle of minimization in line with UK GDPR, DPA 18. And I guess it will be something, as we move closer to 2025, isn't that scary? It's not even that far away.
Yeah.
And we will be revisiting in more detail for sure.
Yeah. And of course, there's the fact that you could go to all of this trouble, and all people will do is use a VPN to get around it. So in the US, in Louisiana, they insisted on age verification. So then, of course, the traffic to these sites collapses.
Yeah.
So that's just traffic from all people. So apparently you had an 80% fall of traffic to Pornhub in Louisiana after those checks came in. But usage of virtual private networks soared. In Louisiana, demand for VPNs tripled, while in Utah it surged by 847% the day after the new age checks came into effect. Because guess what? Potentially, actually, here, the younger people you don't want viewing this stuff, they're a darn sight more proficient using the technology than the older people are who are trying to ban it. So they'll just go ahead, probably try and be able to get hold of a VPN for free and use that to circumvent the checks and watch whatever the hell it is they want to watch.
Well, that's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
No doubt we will be, again, revisiting this story as it unfolds, because we've got a little way to go till 2025. And I'm sure it will be a topic of discussion for many people, given the wider issues in terms of freedom of speech, what you can look at online, as well as the data issues and potentially the data breach issues that could arise here.
And I'm sure.
So that was our last discussion of this episode. But if you would like to hear more from us, including subscribing to our newsletter, as well as receiving information about subscriber-only podcasts and webinars and events, then please subscribe to Premium via our Patreon channel using the link in the show notes. A big thank you to Anson Evaluate for helping to produce this podcast. And if you would like to produce your own podcast, webinar, or you'd be interested to hear more about Anson Evaluate services, please take a look at their website that you can find at www.ansonevaluate.com. Just a reminder, these episodes are available on our website, YouTube channel, podcast channels as well, such as Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon and Google Podcasts, and please feel free to leave us a review. And finally, if you have any questions about anything that we've talked about today, please feel free to email us at admin@digitallawuk.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next week.